Sure.
Professor Freeman, thank you so much for joining us today. And I just had a couple questions for you related to two books of yours, the first of which is Why Food Matters, your most recent book, and uh, a slightly older book called Out of the East, uh, which is about spices. And so,
That's right.
thank you.
Sorry about the background noise.
Oh, no, that's totally fine. My first question for you was sort of more of a personal question on your career, and so I wanted to sort of ask what your journey to studying the history of cuisine was like, how you came about, researching this discipline, because if I recall, I think in your most recent book, you discussed how you were 10 years old and you visited France and you memorized the names of, I believe, all the 2 and 3 star Michelin
The
restaurants.
ones in yes, the three-star restaurants and most of the two stars, yes,
Yeah.
in France.
hmm So yeah, my question was sort of on how you came across, an academic study of food, because I believe your background before then was more sort of on medieval history and the history of Catalonia and Spain. So
That's right. And in fact, that still is my major field, not only in terms of teaching responsibilities, but research.
Mhm.
In fact, my most recent book is on medieval Catalonia and the study of medieval Catalonia, published in November. It's called The um, Splendor and Opulence of the Past. So I never gave up medieval history, but the second book that you have, the book on spices,
Yes.
which was published in 2008, was sort of a bridge between medieval social history
hmm
and culinary history. Uh, the kind of weird aspect is that as a historian of food, I've been most interested in the modern United States and less so in the Middle Ages. But they both have, I guess, what interested me in part, or was the part of the bridge, is status and food and how we um, get involved with likes and dislikes or follow certain food passions for reasons that are not just taste and gastronomy, but taste as understood in terms of status, that certain
Mm.
foods show, either a sophisticated or an upper class status. And that was true in the Middle Ages. It was true in 19th century America. The reason that I mentioned that trip to Europe when I was 10 years old is that I would not have described myself, and even now would not describe myself as, really a food enthusiast, somebody who would go to Denmark just to eat at Noma,
Yes.
or organize a trip to Japan exclusively around restaurants. So
hmm
I certainly like fine dining, and we'll pursue it up to a point. But uh, I would have described myself as having an average interest in culinary experimentation in keeping with, other humanities professors.
Thank you.
When I started working on food, I started, particularly that little book, Why Food Matters. I did remember all sorts of things from being a kid, like also besides the memorizing the 2 and 3 star restaurants, reading my mother's back issues of Gourmet magazine, even
hmm
though I didn't know how to cook and never learned as a kid either. So there are things that when you're looking back, you realize you were a little unusual, even though you didn't kind of think of it at the time.
Mm. Thank you so much. And I think that's a really interesting point you make about the connection between food and status, because um, I haven't really had the opportunity to go to places like Noma or other fine dining restaurants that much in my life. But um, based on what I've seen, I feel like a large part of people, the reason why people dine there is more so status than, I mean, I'm sure the quality's amazing, but what it says
Yes,
about, yeah,
exactly, exactly. It's partly the ability to say, "Oh, yes, we had a wonderful meal at Noma,"
yeah,
um, but also even where you're not focused on the experience, food indicates status. What kind of person serves caviar? What
mm,
kind of person knows about wines?
hmm,
What kind of person can get a reservation at one of the impossible
yeah,
restaurants in New York or
hmm,
San Francisco at the moment.
yeah. I mean, and I think this uh, topic of food and status might also go the other way. So instead of the typically wealthy person who consumes such fine food, I think you mentioned how food was sometimes used not as a direct justification, but as part of the reasoning uh, behind slavery in your book, Why Food Matters. And I think you quoted St. Augustine uh, in a statement that agricultural work is a form of exploitation to feed the wealthy. And although unfree labor might violate natural law, this kind of slavery was viewed as necessary according to the laws governing his Christian society. And I was wondering if there were instances outside of Christianity and St. Augustine where food and status sort of are reflected not just in the consumer, but also in the person who prepares the food.
Yes, that's very interesting, and I don't have a great answer for that other than the person who prepares the food can vary in status tremendously, not just with culture, but within a culture. So that
Hmm.
in China or in ancient Greece and Rome, there are celebrity chefs, and there are
Yes.
people who are greatly admired for their cooking skill, including people who are technically not free or have a low status. At the same time, in most societies, and most of the time, the majority of the people involved in cooking and serving are low status people paid by or owned by people who are of higher.
Yeah.
That is not universal. So, for example, different societies have a different sized retail food sector.
Mm.
So, ancient Rome had a lot of places to buy food. And so small but fairly successful entrepreneurs would produce food, much as owners of restaurants do
Yeah.
today. Whereas in medieval Europe, you've got a lot of sort of mobile food establishments that might serve markets, but you don't have a restaurant culture.
Hmm. Thank you so much. And I think you made, as part of your answer, you sort of mentioned celebrity chefs. And I'm someone who's, if you, sort of go to my YouTube homepage, I'd say like maybe 20% is more sort of social science stuff, but the rest are all cooking videos, which might be weird for like a teenager. But I was wondering what you could comment on sort of the phenomena of sort of celebrity chefs, because I think if I'm not mistaken, and I might very well be mistaken, I think it sort of started with Marco Pierre White and his show, uh, way back in the, I guess it might have been the 80s, but yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Well, there are several parts to the question. I don't want to give you an excessively long answer. Certainly, celebrity chefs go back centuries.
hmm,
So, in Western Europe, the most famous celebrity chef of the Middle Ages was a man known or nicknamed Taillevent, who
mm,
was the chef to the King of France in the late 14th century, and who was knighted by the
mm.
King of France. And his tomb and its sculpture still exists. The
Oh wow.
fact is that his coat of arms has three little stew pots. So it's a somewhat patronizing coat of arms. Nevertheless, he
Yeah.
was proud of it, and
Hmm.
his effigy is sculpted on his tombstone, and he's got a sword, which indicates he's a knight. Um, so the modern celebrity chef certainly is created through television. And um, when television was first developed, cooking shows were among the first programs.
Hmm.
So cooking kind of lent itself to TV because it was addressed to women who are at home during the day. It was personality driven, but also information driven. Um, the first modern celebrity chef, well, uh, chefs like Ty Avant or the first TV chefs, and even Julia Child, who
Oh yeah.
brought French high-end cooking to Americans on television. These were all what might be called craftspeople. In other words, they were very good at a craft the way a carpenter is
Hmm.
very good, or a person who is better than other people at making something that lots of people make. The contrast with the celebrity chef of the late 20th and our century is that celebrity chefs now are artists or
Mm.
creators of things you've never seen before. So Rene Redzepi at Noma is not making, a kind of a veal Orloff,
Yeah.
invented 150 years ago, but making veal Orloff better than anybody else. He's
Hmm.
not making a traditional dish. He's creating something out of sheer genius,
Mm.
and defines his project in terms of things like sourcing ingredients. Uh, so the first person to break with the model of the chef as artisan, I think actually is Paul Bocuse in
Mm.
France, who is, a little older than Marco Pierre White. The same kind of idea that, yes, I've mastered a tradition, but I'm inventing things that you've never seen before. In his case, Bocuse, be like Picasso. Picasso was mastered all sorts of artistic techniques, nevertheless created a body of work that is very distinctive and not part of an overall school.
Mm. Thank you so much. Uh, so my next question uh, was also sort of related to the well, this isn't really related to the celebrity chef phenomenon anymore, but more so on the side of religion. And I was wondering if you could discuss the role of fasting in various religions and its significance beyond the simple physical act of abstaining from food.
Yes, certainly, fasting is a form of self uh, awareness with
Hmm.
regard to food. In the Christian tradition, it is penitential. In the Jewish tradition, it's penitential, but it's also not, it's limited to the Yom Kippur holiday pretty much.
Hmm.
Uh, Different religious traditions emphasize either fasting or prohibiting certain foods.
Mm.
Obviously, Islam and Judaism, but also Buddhism, which forbade or discouraged consuming meat,
Mm.
and some parts of religions of India, some people, depending on their status and their location. Um, the spiritual benefits of fasting um, vary. I would say, without being a scholar of religion, comparative religion, in Christianity, it's clear that fasting is a penance. So it's now Lent, and if you are a traditional observer of Catholicism, you
Hmm.
have given up a substantial number of foods, meat, dairy products, and so forth, um, as a kind of penitential observation. In Islam, Ramadan, which also, I guess, is taking place now, is more a form of sort of self-discipline. And it's difficult, but rewarding as well. It's not supposed to um, cleanse you of sin. It's supposed to make you a better and more aware,
Mm.
religiously aware person. And so I think that's a subtle difference. It's not that Lent fails to focus awareness. Awareness and penance
Mm.
have an overlap or an
Yeah,
intersection, but the emphases seem to me to be different.
thank you. And you mentioned sort of how many of these major religions, when they talk about fasting, often focus on meat. And my question was, why is it that meat, as opposed to certain spices or some other food, is often the first thing that's given up or the central thing that's given up when it comes to abstinence with food? And is it just the fact that it's so prevalent in so much of our diets, or is it something about uh, the nature of meat itself?
I think it's the nature of meat itself because it involves killing animals.
Hmm.
And then why is fish okay, you might say?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in Christianity, um, uh, the process of killing animals, the amount of blood involved, um, uh, I think in Eastern religions, and to some extent in uh, uh, some of the Greek tradition of vegetarianism associated with Pythagoras. It is the act of killing animals which is renounced as somehow brutal or unnecessary or a sign of a certain kind of uh, ethic of domination.
Hmm.
In the Catholic tradition or in the Christian tradition, I think there is some of that, but it is more your first category, the pleasure, the importance, the sort of basicness of it.
Hmm.
And so you're giving up something that is not, um, the way some people now will give up chocolate.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a real sacrifice, but it's not um, it's not the thing is not about giving up pleasure exactly, but giving up your everyday sense of what it is to be human and a human who consumes food.
yeah. Thank you. And this this question sort of goes back to our former topic on status in food, but I was wondering if you could share some insights on how food has been used as a tool of power or resistance throughout history. Because I think in Why Food Matters, you discuss how Jewish ladies in concentration camps in World War II came up with, and I think I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, but the Theresienstadt cookbook, um,
Yeah, yeah.
despite the fact that, obviously they wouldn't be able to follow the recipes in any sense. And I'm not sure they had the confidence that this cookbook would sort of proliferate beyond the boundaries of the
Right,
concentration
right.
camp.
So that is an exceptional act of resistance. And I mention it, the Theresienstadt women collected this set of recipes in conditions of near starvation.
Hmm.
Uh, and as you said, the book was hidden and found some time later,
Hmm.
and then published. But that is a way of preserving your humanity under extreme dehumanizing conditions. And so food is an expression of your humanity and creativity. Uh, and under harsh circumstances is a reiteration of your humanity against those who would dehumanize you.
Mm.
Um, Food as a weapon, unfortunately, is very common in war or as a consequence of war to
Hmm.
starve the enemy,
Yeah.
to starve civilians. and as a weapon to control people, as in various totalitarian regimes of the 20th century that undertook grand projects that included either planned or unplanned the imposition of famine on millions of people.
Thank you. And I think you mentioned in the first part of your answer there about how food is such a powerful form of self-expression. And I was wondering, in your opinion, what the conditions were that sort of allowed this to be the case, because I guess the earlier primitive humans sort of needed food solely for the purpose of sustenance. But when was the sort of I guess change made where we can actually start using this as a form of expression rather than just a means of getting by?
I think very early, because of status to some extent and because of taste. So different societies have different tastes, and those
Hmm.
tastes are not always environmental. In other words, there are people who live near the sea but who are not particularly interested in fish.
Oh.
And people who don't live near the sea and who are passionately devoted to fish. I think I
Hmm.
mentioned in that book, Madrid is a
Yeah.
place that is inland, but wildly enthusiastic
Hmm.
about fish, whereas Denmark and even most of Britain, they've historically only liked one or two kinds of fish and been fairly or surprisingly indifferent to the fact that they have this huge coastline. Um, the so the ways in which people define their themselves through food are not necessarily just an expression of a kind of either biological or environmental condition. And so it goes back pretty far, I would say, the preference for certain foods over others. And even in prehistoric humanity, you can see that they go to great effort to get fat out of animals. The animals that they hunted tended to be pretty lean.
Hmm.
And so they would make fires, and after getting the marrow out of the bones, they would then boil the bones to get a kind of bone broth, as we would now call it, that's fatty because the tongue and the bones are really where the animal had fat. So
Hmm.
their desire for fat has some biological, evolutionary even, significance, but nevertheless, you can imagine them saying, "No, I don't want another steak from that
Yeah.
saber-toothed tiger. I want to have some of that broth."
Yeah. Thank you. And this next question was also uh, harkens back to our former conversation on food and religion. And I was wondering if you could explain the significance of food symbolism in religious rituals across different faiths, because I think the example that comes to mind for me immediately is sort of the consumption of the Eucharist in, Catholic Mass, where Jesus's body is literally represented in the, little disc that you're about to put in your mouth. But I was wondering if uh, you know, the central religious figure in a belief system sort of being represented through a singular, uh, it's weird to call it dish, but in a singular uh, food stuff. Is that really unique to Christianity, or can it be found in other
I,
contexts?
I'm not sure it's unique, but it's certainly characteristic and not replicated in
Hmm.
Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, religions of India. Not really. That is, there may be foods that are sacred or consumed on particular occasions, but they're not uh, regarded as um, a form of transubstantiation.
Mm, thank you. And I was wondering if you could sort of touch upon whether food can act as a medium for interfaith dialogue and understanding, and if so, can you think of any historical examples?
There's an interesting book coming out by a historian American who spent most of his career in Israel named Kenneth Stowe, and it's about Rome during the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries and butchers in Rome and
mm,
collaboration as well as a certain amount of competition and persecution between Christian and Jewish butchers.
mm.
So um, there is collaboration because uh, a lot of the parts of an animal Jews don't want. And
Yeah.
so, from a point of view of economics and conservation of scarce resources, it makes sense for Christian butchers to take the parts of the animal
Uh-huh.
that the Jews don't want.
Hmm.
But this also creates resentments and suspicions. So, yeah, there is a lot of collaboration, even in societies where there's a dominant and a sort of persecuted or semi-persecuted minority.
Thank you. And uh, this question was it's sort of related back to our former discussion on why meat is sort of special in abstinence. But more broadly, because in Why Food Matters, you discuss how abstaining from certain dishes, at least among the three Abrahamic religions, was used to promote atonement. And I was wondering, what makes food, you know, an incredibly special or different vehicle for atonement than other forms of atonement, like, say, taking a vow of chastity? Is it because it's just so central to human identity, or is there something more to that?
I think it's central to human survival, and it has an urgency when you deny yourself. So, yes, if you were to abstain from sex, you would be making a sacrifice, but you notice the absence of food more
Hmm.
quickly. In
Oh
other
yeah.
words, most people can't go for more than a few hours of wakeful activity without having food. So a fast for a day or two and I think also there is a kind of link between biology and psychology or physiology and psychology. There is a way in which fasting makes you both hungry and yet light or spiritually purified, which
Mhm.
is why the sort of wellness industry emphasizes things like fasting
Yeah.
or subsisting on, supposedly non-toxic or antioxidant or purgative processes.
Hmm.
You feel emptied of the gross materiality that
Hmm.
characterizes the rest of your life. Your organs are surprisingly quiet because they're not working.
Oh.
Your
Oh wow.
digestive organs, right?
Yeah. I was I'm surprised to hear that because uh I mean, although I am a Catholic, sort of my objection to, abstaining from food or fasting was sort of that, you could use the reasoning that, not having food can sort of get rid of a major distraction in life and lead you to focus more on sort of your spiritual goals. But I feel like the hunger that might come from that fasting might serve as, just as a just as potent form of distraction, if not more potent than actually having food.
Right, right. Well, uh, there's a book called Holy Feast, Holy Fast. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
heard of this. It was published in the
No,
1980s
yeah.
about uh, female, usually young women who
Hmm.
fasted extremely.
Oh yeah.
And like St. Catherine of Siena is a famous
Oh yeah.
example.
Yeah.
But there are whole groups of them. And the thesis of the book is that this is not really the same as modern anorexia or,
Hmm.
food-related illnesses.
Yeah.
It is an expression of spirituality, but it goes way, way beyond what I was describing, the slight kind of lightness or self-satisfaction of
Hmm.
abstaining from food for a limited amount of time.
Yeah. And I mean, this next question was a little bit more contemporary, but I was wondering, In what ways do you think understanding food history can help us address current issues like food security and sustainability? And have you sort of come across that link in your research?
Yes, a couple of things that I try to emphasize in my classes are that often the well-off lecture the poor about try to educate the poor to eat better. Oh,
Hmm.
you shouldn't eat that fast food. You should eat,
Yeah.
vegetables. And usually it makes the wealthy uncomfortable to be told that the problem of poor people is that they're poor, not that they're
Yeah. Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And uh, Another is the care of the self. I think that a lot of college students and young people generally, but also it's all through the society, um, focus too much on food as their enemy. It's no
Yeah.
accident that the United States has both more diet books, more diet information, more uh, obsession with diet, and a tremendous obesity problem.
Hmm.
So, to some extent, the message would be to lighten up or to regard food as your friend rather than as a constant adversary.
Yeah.
Because ironically, we're engaged more in fasting in a secular society in which religious belief is not as universal or strong as it used to be. Nevertheless, there's a kind of secular form of self-denial, and much of it, in my opinion, is uh, destructive.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's a good point that you make because, you know, obviously the reason why those who are not terribly well off might, resort to less healthy options is because that might be the only option that they can have. It's not that,
Right. McDonald's is cheaper than going out and buying broccoli,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
um, yeah, exactly.
Thank you. And this is sort of my last formal question, and it was, what future research directions do you find promising in the study of food or its relation to religion? Yeah.
I guess the way in which religion, both people who identify themselves as religious, but where religious ideas like fasting come back, even
Mm.
in secular societies. So you could say that that means that people can't live without religion, even if they're not theists.
Oh, yeah,
Or
that's
you could
interesting. Yeah.
say that they have transferred the ethos of self-denial to a secular world. But and for future research, it would be interesting to see how this works out in societies in uh, countries that are either still fairly poor or undeveloped, or countries that have developed very quickly.
Mm.
So, a country like Korea, for example,
Oh, yeah.
where there are still tremendous uh, um, importance of what might be called traditions or
Hmm.
rituals or family observances, but where actual religious practice is weaker and where people have moved from a rural or village society to a largely urban one. Not just how does that change food practices, but how does that change the spiritual importance and perception of food?
Yeah. And I actually happen to be Korean, so it's really interesting that you bring that up because, I mean, I think the presence of food in our culture is so enormous to the point where, some families don't consider you having like a full dining table unless you include certain XYZ dishes. Or, if you're gonna have a certain dish, like a really interesting example to me was Koreans usually view that like the most appropriate way to eat like Korean instant ramen is in like copper pots, and any other way is like not appropriate, which is sort of like I guess an insider Korean joke. But yeah, it's interesting that you bring that
Yes,
up.
exactly. That kind of uh, you're still obsessed with the right way to do things, even though you're actually applying it to a convenience product.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And this might be the most important question of the day, but I was wondering, since I also live in Connecticut, I was wondering what your favorite restaurants in New Haven were, and is a
Yeah,
Pete's really better than New York style pizza?
yeah. So I should say that my credentials are somewhat weak because I live actually near New York City, like
Oh,
many
okay.
people who teach
Yeah.
at Yale. But um, my favorite pizzeria is, well, my favorite restaurants, sure, the pizza places,
Yeah.
but Zupardi's, which is in West Haven, where
Mm.
they shuck the clams to order when they make the white clam pizza. That's
Oh, wow.
Cuppardi apostrophe S. I don't know if you've
I
come
haven't been
across
there.
this place. Check it
No.
out.
Okay.
Of the three big ones in New Haven, I guess I like Modern
Mm.
because they don't have an attitude, and you don't have to,
Yeah.
usually don't have to wait in line.
Yeah.
But that shows again that my I am interested in food, but not willing to make some sacrifices that
Yeah.
that it demands. There's a Japanese restaurant that opened recently, um,
Oh, is it
whose name
Hachiroku?
Hachiroku, exactly.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
that place is great.
Yeah. I thought that place was really
Olea, the
Olea, the
Spanish
Spanish.
restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a favorite.
Thank you,
The Luke is very good.
Luke. Have you been to
Yeah, it's in the Taft Hotel building.
oh yeah. I was wondering if you've been to Villa Lulu, which I think is like this relatively smaller Italian restaurant. Because if you haven't been,
What is it called?
it's Villa Lulu. So it's
Oh, yes, I have.
yeah, yeah. I thought that place was just great. So
Yeah, yeah. I've only been once and I had a very good meal there. I'd say
yeah,
yeah, it's better. And relatively new. Yeah.
thank you. And is would you say that a pizza is better than New York pizza, or would
Yes,
you
yes. And I
really?
grew up in New York, and I like New York pizza, but I love food that is burned.
Hmm.
So, I always like to have toast that's, like black. And
Yeah,
so the burned crust in New Haven pizza alone makes it worthwhile. But just the intensity of the smokiness, I love.
yeah. Well, I mean, those were all the questions that I had for today.
Okay, okay, it's great talking to you.
Thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful
Well,
talking to you too.
good. Thank you for
Th-
contacting me. Take care.
Thank you. You too.